The crowd screamed for blood. Dust rose beneath the blazing Roman sun, mingling with the iron scent of death. A man, his chest heaving, stood victorious. His opponent sprawled lifeless at his feet. The emperor's thumb hovered in the air, holding one man's fate in a single gesture. Yet as the crowd demanded mercy, the gladiator knelt and chose death. What kind of world could twist honor so deeply that a man would prefer the blade to freedom? Before we begin, make sure you like, subscribe, and join us as we uncover Rome's darkest secret. The Roman arena was more than entertainment. It was a theater of the gods, a stage where men bled for the illusion of virtue. For the gladiator, every fight was both punishment and performance. They were slaves, prisoners, and volunteers alike, bound by oaths written in blood. The roar of the audience was both intoxicating and damning. It promised fleeting glory, yet behind every cheer hid the cruel laughter of those who never fought, never suffered, and never understood what it meant to die standing. Some gladiators had been soldiers once, commanders who defied Rome, warriors who lost their wars, men stripped of name and nation. Others were born into bondage, raised only to fight. But a few, known as auctorati, had entered the arena willingly. They sold their freedom for fame, food, and a chance at immortality. Why? Because in a society that worshipped power, the arena offered a perverse kind of equality. Every man, noble or slave, bled the same color. The Colosseum was a machine of spectacle, designed to turn suffering into poetry. Beneath the sand lay tunnels reeking of blood, sweat, and animal musk. Cages clanged open, lions growled in the dark, and men whispered final prayers. The spectators never saw the tears, only the triumph. The emperor sat high above them all, a god among mortals, deciding who lived and who died with a flick of his wrist. For the gladiator, life was never his own. It belonged to the mob, to the emperor, to fate. But what drove a man to embrace death, even when offered freedom? Ancient accounts tell of victors who, when granted release, refused it. One, known as Flamma, won the rudis, the wooden sword symbolizing liberty, 4 times. Each time, he rejected it. Historians can only speculate why. Perhaps he no longer knew life beyond combat. Or perhaps he found honor in the arena's purity, where death was clean and life was deceit. To understand this choice, we must look at what freedom meant in Rome. For most gladiators, it wasn't the promise of peace or dignity. It was poverty, shame, and alienation. A freed gladiator carried scars that screamed of servitude. Society would never see him as an equal citizen. The cheers would fade, the gifts would stop, and the world would remember only that he was once property. To die in the arena was to die as a god. To live beyond it was to crawl as a beggar. The gladiator schools, or ludi, were prisons disguised as sanctuaries. Within their walls, men were broken and remade. Brutal drills, starvation, and constant punishment forged them into killers. Yet bonds formed there too, brotherhoods sealed in blood. Instructors taught not just swordplay but survival. How to take a wound without screaming, how to die beautifully. To the Romans, a man's final expression mattered more than his life. Imagine the sound before a battle began, the deep hum of thousands waiting for death. The gates opened, and the gladiators emerged, their armor glinting beneath the sun. Every step was a prayer. The ground was hot with spilt blood. One man might survive, but all would die in time. The Romans believed watching this was not cruelty, it was education. To witness courage in death was to learn virtue. It said that the best gladiators became legends, worshipped like demigods. Their portraits were painted on walls, their names whispered by noble women in candlelight. Yet behind the fame lay despair. Many drank themselves into oblivion between matches. Others prayed to die spectacularly, to be remembered not as slaves, but as heroes who defied fear itself. The philosopher Seneca once wrote that the arena revealed truth, that life was brief, pain inevitable, and dignity earned only through suffering. To the Roman mind, the gladiator embodied virtus, courage, discipline, endurance. The crowd's adoration wasn't for survival. It was for the way a man met death. So when freedom came, it felt hollow. What was life without the roar of the crowd, without purpose, without that single heartbeat between blade and oblivion? Among the fighters, stories spread like fire, of ghosts haunting the tunnels, of comrades who fought even after death. In the half-light of the barracks, they spoke of honor and damnation. Some believed the gods themselves watched the games, judging souls by how they fell. And so, they trained not just to kill, but to die well, without fear, without weakness, with eyes open. Each morning, before sunrise, they rubbed oil into their muscles, binding scars with linen. The scent of sweat and metal filled the air. The lanista, their trainer, walked among them with cold eyes. "Fight for glory," he said, "for the gods love those who bleed." To refuse the arena was to invite punishment. To embrace it was to taste a twisted form of honor. One legend tells of a Thracian gladiator named Marcus, who once stood before Emperor Domitian. Offered freedom after 100 victories, he instead knelt and said, "I was born to die standing." The crowd erupted. Domitian smiled, and Marcus met his end the next day by choice. His story spread across Rome, not as tragedy, but triumph. Such men became martyrs of the sand. They found transcendence in pain, redemption in spectacle. Their deaths were the price of memory. In a civilization obsessed with immortality, dying beautifully was the closest thing to eternal life. The crowd did not see this tragedy. They saw only art. The games were framed as gifts from emperors to the people, proof of Rome's power, its wealth, its mercy. But mercy in Rome was a cruel illusion. For every life spared, another dozen were condemned. The cycle never ended, because the appetite for blood was endless. Beneath the Colosseum, the dead were dragged through tunnels into mass graves. The sand above soaked endlessly with new blood. There was no applause for the fallen, no prayers. Rome celebrated victory, not humanity. And yet, amid the brutality, something sacred lingered. The bond between warriors was unbreakable. They mourned each other quietly, carving names into stone, whispering to the spirits of the slain. In a world that saw them as beasts, they found their own code, a creed of loyalty stronger than Rome's laws. When the wooden sword was offered, the symbol of manumission, some saw not salvation, but exile. Freedom meant the loss of everything that defined them. The sand had become their temple, their altar, their grave. Historians suggest psychological bondage played a role. After years of conditioning, many gladiators couldn't imagine life without violence. The arena was their world, and beyond it lay emptiness. To walk away was to face themselves, and that, perhaps, was the one enemy they could not defeat. The philosopher Epictetus, himself once a slave, warned that freedom without purpose is another kind of imprisonment. For gladiators, death offered a conclusion, a perfect, unbroken story. Survival meant facing decay, obscurity, and the slow death of memory. There were women in the arena too, known as gladiatrices. They fought under the same sun, their beauty and ferocity turning crowds delirious. Some won fame, others infamy. Like their male counterparts, they too were trapped by spectacle, hailed as symbols of Rome's decadence. Over time, the games lost their glory. By the 5th century, as Christianity spread, the arenas grew quiet. The new faith condemned blood sport as barbarism. Yet the ghosts remained. Even now, historians walk those ruins and speak of an energy, an echo of courage, of death, of men who refused to be forgotten. The question lingers, were they slaves of Rome or slaves of destiny? Perhaps both. The truth is crueler still. Rome's greatest entertainment was built upon human despair, and those who fought became willing sacrifices on the altar of immortality. When modern audiences romanticize gladiators, they forget the stench, the screams, the loneliness. They see glory, not agony. But the men who chose death did so not out of madness, but conviction. They believed dying with honor was worth more than living unseen. The gladiators' final act was a message, one Rome didn't realize it was hearing. It said, "You may own my body, but not my soul." And in that defiance lay the one form of freedom Rome could never control. The sand may have swallowed their bones, but not their legacy. Their stories endure in stone, in art, in the whisper of the Colosseum's wind. Every broken arch, every shadowed corridor still remembers the names of those who refused to kneel. Today, their spirit lives in the idea of resilience. The the belief that even in captivity, man can define his own worth. They were prisoners, yet they died as kings. The gladiators' tragedy is universal. It speaks to anyone who has ever felt trapped by circumstance, who has chosen dignity over survival. Their story reminds us that sometimes, to be free, one must embrace the inevitable. Rome fell, its emperors forgotten, its arenas in ruin. But the gladiator endures, forever standing between death and eternity, his defiance carved into history's marrow. So the next time you stand in front of the Colosseum, listen closely. You may hear the echo of a crowd, the clash of steel, the whisper of a dying man choosing his fate. Like, subscribe, and join us for the next tale of power, pain, and the strange beauty of the human will.